Hello everybody, this is Gabby's Games, and this is gonna be something really different than what I do normally. Today we got a special program called Cockatrice, and this is a simulation program for a game called Magic the Gathering. It's a game that I play myself. Note that this program is in no way affiliated to Wizards of the Coast, which are the makers of the game, or Magic the Gathering at all. It's just like a simulation game, like fan-made thing. And I'm basically just gonna be teaching you guys a little bit on how to play this game because I think I might actually be interested in occasionally doing some videos about this game on my channel. Anyways, first up, we're gonna be going in what kind of game this is. So, I got some stuff here laid out to show you guys. So first up, this is my character. I have 20 life points, and basically the goal is get somebody to 0 life. That is how you kill someone if you have 0 life, or if there's somehow another effect that says kill target player, basically. And if you are with more than 2 players, it is basically the last one standing wins. So we do that with cards. So here's my so-called deck. A deck is normally consisted of 60 cards. Note that I'm going to explain for the casual format. So there are exceptions to every rule basically, but normally you're at least 60 cards. But if you want to have more cards, that generally doesn't have an issue. But these are just some cards that I can have, really just to show you guys how it works. So I have gonna be viewing my library so I can see all the cards, and just gonna be giving some examples here. So there are the most important things to understand are the two basic resources. As with a lot of games, there are resources. The first one is mana, and the second one is cards. At the start of the game, you start with drawing 7 cards. So for example, here's a draw of 7 cards. And you can only draw 1 card per turn. And that kind of limits your what you can play. Second thing is mana. So here's an example for mana. You have white, you have blue, black, red, green, and colorless mana. And this thing really doesn't want to move properly. Alright, so we're gonna just put these away again. And first up, we're gonna go over the so-called land cards. The land cards, the main ones that you're gonna be, that's not the card that I was looking at. The hell? Anyways, we are talking about the forest, the island, the swamp. Where did the rest go? Is my thing glitching out? Lower again. Yep, it was glitching out somehow. Yeah, it is totally glitching out. Oh, great. So I should have all 5 of them here. Yeah, there we go. So these are 5 land cards. Each of these say basic land, and this one says swamp, this one says mountain, plains, forest, and island. As you might notice, they all have a color corresponding with the 5 colors that I mentioned, but not the 6th color. Well, colorless isn't a color. That's one thing to kind of keep in the back of your head. But the plains produces white mana, the island blue, and so forth. And to indicate you are producing something or you are activating something, we have a system in this game which is called tapping. Tapping is basically turning the card sideways. So this indicates that this card has been used. So I'm gonna be basically emptying this here. But if I tap this island for mana, I will create 1 blue mana. If I tap this forest, I'll get 1 green mana. You cannot store up mana like between turns, so you have to use them at that moment. For example, with 1 blue and 1 green mana, I could, for example, play this card, which is a creature, which is the second most important card other than the lands. So this one, right here it is called Grizzly Bears, that's the name of the card. And with the exception of basic lands, You can have only 4 cards with the same name. That includes translated versions. So if you have a Chinese grizzly bear, if it's translated still grizzly bear, you can still only have 4. But right here up top to the right, you have the so-called mana cost. So here you can see the little tree with the green, and I have this 1. The 1 is what is called generic mana cost. And generic mana cost basically says you can use any color that you want to play this. So we're spending, on this grizzly bear, we're spending 1 green and 1 of any color that we want. So we use this 2 mana to play the grizzly bear. So basically to recap it, grizzly bear is in our hand, which is what this zone right here is in this simulator. Then we tap 2 lands for the mana, and we play it. Now, this here right here is only flavor text, which is just like some random story, which you can, for now, we can ignore. But here, because first up, we can see your creature. So that's this one is a land, this is a creature. And this one is of the type bear. And there are cards that say, oh, specific, like bears get some bonuses, or unicorns get bonuses, or something. That said, this creature has 2 attack power and 2 toughness. So that's right signal right here. So the 2 attack power means that every time this thing attacks, it will do 2 damage to whatever it hits. If it is an opponent, it will do 2 damage to its opponent, which will reduce the life total by 2. So for example right here. So this grizzly bear would have to attack me 10 times to kill me. And the second number is the toughness. And the toughness is basically the health of the creature. This thing can take 2 damage before it dies. Now mana cost is often a indicator of strength. For example, here we got a centaur courser, which is a very similar creature. This one is 1 and a green for a 2/2. This is 2 and a green, so a total of 3 mana for a 3/3. So these are both don't have extra abilities. But this one is a centaur and a warrior. So as you can see, you can actually have multiple subtypes, which what they are called, of a creature. To be honest, you can have like 10 of them if it fits in the name. Like if it fits in the bar, like sometimes they have to do smaller text. But I have seen some higher amounts of names. And it doesn't only account for like the creature subtype, because that's not the only types of cards we have. Also, sorry for the little pauses, guys. I'm actually kind of sick. I'm still coughing, and I actually have to mute my microphone to cough for multiple times. So, for example, right here, we got a different card type. This is an artifact. This is a so-called Dimir Signet. It costs 2 mana of any color. That's something in common with artifacts. They are often do not require any color to play. There are colored variants, but those are more rare than the not colored variants. And as you can see, creatures are monsters. Treat artifacts more like machines. So this one can give you mana. So by paying 1 mana and tapping it, this is what this symbol right here is. So you have to tap it, and then you have to like tap 1 mana to feed into the system right here. And you tap it, then you get 1 blue and 1 black mana. And there are cards that straight up give you mana that you do not require you have to initially have mana, and etc. And there are a lot of different types. I will not go into it, but this is just an example of what an artifact can do. Artifacts can also be creatures, with for example this Chief of the Foundry. So this is a 3 mana. This is an artifact creature, which is a 2/3, and other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. So let's say I'm just gonna duplicate it here. I have 2 of these creatures, and both of them say other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. So I'm just gonna look around. Is this an artifact creature? Nope. This is an artifact creature? Nope. This is an artifact creature? Yes, but I'm counting it for disability, and it has to be other artifacts, so it cannot boost itself. This one is not itself, but it is an artifact creature, so it will get +1/+1. And this is an example of a permanent effect, which is a so-called static ability that happens for as long as this Chief of the Foundry dude is on the battlefield. But we have two of them, so we have basically this effect that they both boost each other. And if there was a third one, then they would all three would get +2/+2. The effect stacks unless it is specifically stated otherwise. Then a third variant would be enchantments. Enchantments are similar like artifacts that are not like non-creature artifacts, like they have some kind of effect or some kind of activation thing that they can do. For example, this propaganda card is 2 and a blue mana, so a total of 3 mana, to have an effect that says creatures that cannot attack you unless the player that owns those creatures, that's the controller, pays 2 mana of any color for each creature that he has that attacks you. So let's say these two creatures here are on my enemy's side. I got a second propaganda on the field. He wants to attack with those two creatures. He has to tap to indicate they are attacking, but they are only allowed to attack if they pay 2 times 2 mana with this card. And there are there's a lot of variant enchantment effects, but they're mostly static. For example, favorable winds card here says creatures with the ability flying get +1/+1. And I don't think I actually do have an example. No, I actually do not. Well, actually, I kind of do here. This is another example of an sub-multiple type enchantment creature. Is also possible. As far as I know, artifact enchantments do not exist, but who knows what might be possible. But this one says creatures that I have gain the ability haste. And haste is one of the more key abilities and more knowns together with flying. So I'll actually be explaining these two abilities. So basically, whenever you play a creature, you are not allowed to attack with it on the same turn. Um, I often joke about it like, well, you summon a portal in the middle of the air, and the creature falls out of it. He falls on the floor, and he is knocked out. You have to wait for a little bit for him to wake up. So you play him, and you have to wait until next turn. Not with haste. If they have haste, they somehow manage to land on their feet like proper cats do, and can immediately attack. That's a very aggressive ability, for example, that's very useful in decks that wants your enemy dead as fast as possible. Well, for example, here is a card that says flying. Flying is an ability that literally says creatures cannot block. And actually, I do have to explain then what the actual procedures of attacking and blocking. So I'm just gonna throw these away. Gonna throw these away, and this one as well because this is all we need really. And I'm gonna grab a second grizzly bear here. So this is gonna be our opponent. This is gonna be me. So here's all the turn phases that exist in this game. So we start with a so-called untap step. So whatever we have that is tapped becomes untapped, so we can use it again for our turn. Then we have an upkeep step. You can have cards that say at the beginning of your turn, and to signal that, they gave that a name called the upkeep. They say at the beginning of your upkeep, do something. Then you have your draw step. Then you got to draw that one card. And then you have the so-called first main phase. During the first main phase, you're allowed to play cards. You can tap those cards to, again, if this one was in my hand, I can play it. That's only allowed during the main phases. There are 2 per turn. Then we have this entire combat step. So first we start with combat. Then we can decide, since it's my turn, whether I'm going to attack or not. If I am going to attack, which creatures I'm going to use to attack, and at which player. Because if there are more than 2 players, then you will have multiple opponents. So I have a 3/3 creature and a 2/2 creature. They have a 2/2 creature as well. If I would decide to attack with my 2/2, it might be possible that they decide to block and they both die. And let's say I'm just fine with that, so I'm just gonna say, okay, I'm gonna attack with both my Grizzly Bear and my Centaur Corsair. Then we're going to the so-called block step. Then he can decide whether he will take 5 damage or whether he will nobly sacrifice his creature by blocking either of the 2 creatures right here. So let's compare it to a castle, and you have a gate. So you can, when a catapult is shooting at you, you can either let the rock get into your castle and hit you, or you can close the gate and let the gate take the damage. So you can either decide to take the damage directly, or let one of your creatures take the damage. So let's say again we will pit these two against each other. What will happen during the so-called damage step is when the damage happens. So this creature will do 2 damage to the Grizzly Bear. Like Grizzly Bear 1 does 2 damage to Grizzly Bear 2. And at the same time, Grizzly Bear 2 will do 2 damage to Grizzly Bear 1. And since they both only have 2 toughness, those will hit 0 and both will die. And then they both, again, if they both die, they get buried, and that is in the graveyard. So they will both be moved to the graveyard, and his will be put in like his player's graveyard, and not every player has their own graveyard. But they will be dead, and he will have to take 3 damage. He could also decide, let's say, he is only at 3 life, so if he does not block this creature, he will die. So he literally has to like fodder himself in front of it. This thing, Grizzly Bears will do 2 damage to the Corsair, but it has 3 health, so it will survive. And the Corsair will do 3 damage to the Grizzly Bear, which is enough to kill it, which result in the Grizzly Bear dying and the Centaur Corsair surviving. Then, for example, here's another creature. Creatures can have like all kinds of abilities as well, like the same with the tap ability. This one can tap to give you a green mana. It's only a 1/1, but it only costs 1 mana. And it can allow you to so-called ramp, which is referring to a specific card, Rampant Growth, which I will not be going into, but basically it allows you to play more expensive cards in terms of mana on earlier turns, because the land cards. So again, let's put this right here, and let's say I'll be starting on my turn 1. I'm allowed to play 1 land card per turn, and that's the number of first main phase. Then I will tap the 1 land card, and I will play a so-called 1-drop. Those are mostly played on turn 1. They are generally weak and not impactful, and they easily become outclassed later in the game. So I'll end my turn. Opponent will take his turn, then will again will get my turn. I will draw a random card, and now I can get to play a second land. And now I have 2 mana, and I have an extra mana, so I can actually use all of these 3 to play the Centaur Corsair. While if I did not have the Llanowar Elves, I could only tap 2 mana and play the Grizzly Bears. So I'm playing a 3/3 versus a 2/2. Now there are also again the color requirements of green right here, and I have actually pretty simple example right here. Here is a Leatherback Bailoff. It is green, 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 so it is still 3 mana, just like the Centaur Corsair, but it's a 4/5 instead of a 3/3, which is quite a bit stronger. Even if the Centaur Corsair would get +1/+1, it will still die to the Leatherback, and the Leatherback can still kill the Corsair. And that's all because of mana requirements. The philosophy is the more color you have, like the harder it becomes to cast. Because let's say I'm a deck that only has green and blue. And like no matter whether I even have like all of these lands in the play, I guess not play the Bailoff because I have 1, 2 green mana. None of these produce blue like none of these produce green mana, so I should not play the Leatherback. And I realized that we have actually strayed off the thing that was flying. But flying is an example of an ability which is so-called an evasion ability. If a creature has flying, like if we're going to go back to the castle example, they will fly over your castle walls and you will take the damage whether you want to or not. They can only be blocked by other creatures with flying, so then you will have a dogfight with different flying creatures, or creatures with the ability reach. And reach is basically comparable to a bow and arrow. They can not, the bow and arrow, like the archer, cannot get over your wall, but they can still shoot things down that try to get over the wall, like on their own. And next up, we got cards that do not stay onto the battlefield. Then for here we have a sorcery, and we have the instant, and I have two various types of instants right here. And the difference right here is like all of these cards have a one-time effect and then move to the graveyard. Chart of course says one blue and then one of any color. I'll be playing black for this example. I will be able to draw two cards. So two. And then I must discard a card unless I already attacked with a creature this turn. So if I had attacked with a creature, I don't have to discard a card. But let's say I have not yet attacked, so I have to discard a card, which means move the card to your graveyard. You can no longer use the card. And after its effect is done, it goes to the graveyard itself, and it just like it doesn't really do anything for the rest of the game, unless you have, again, like there are exceptions to pretty much everything I say here, unless you have some way to interact with your graveyard, for example. And here are two cards that are really essential things in the game of Magic. These are two removal cards, in that this one says destroy target creature. So it pretty much is as easy as it gets. So you are allowed to take a creature as target. If as long as the card that you're targeting is a creature, it is a legal target. So I decided to target, for example, the Centaur Courser. And the fact is, it will get destroyed. And destroyed is basically it dies. Another example, and then after this one is done, it goes to your graveyard. Another example would be this Lightning Bolt card. There's only one red mana, so it's a bit cheaper than this Murder card. That's a total of 3 mana. But it deals 3 damage to target creature or player. So I can either do 3 damage directly to someone, or 3 damage to a creature. And 3 damage means that it can kill anything that has 3 or less toughness. So I can kill the Llanowar Elves, I can kill the Centaur Courser, but I cannot kill the Leatherback Baloth with this card. You can, however, stack damage. So damage only wears off at the end of the turn. So let's say I attack with this Leatherback Baloth, and because I think, okay, he only has a 2/2 from the earlier example. Well, he will block and it will die. Then this dude will take 2 damage. So effectively, it becomes a 4/3. The Lightning Bolt is like, haha, surprise. And because that already had taken 2 damage, the 3 extra damage is enough to kill it. What makes the difference between an instant and a sorcery is that the sorcery is only allowed to play during the main phases, while the instant is allowed to be played on any of these steps, including on your opponent's turn. So you can, like, if he tries to play something, you can respond to it by, like, before it actually happens, you can actually cast, and that's the actually, like, response mechanic in this game is really complex, and I will actually not go into it for now. And I hope that this actually clarified enough to at least go to the basics a little bit. So we're gonna be recapping here. We got lands that give you basic types of mana. The main types are forest, island, mountain, plains, and swamp, which each represent one of the 5 colors in the game. Each color has their own personality. For example, red likes doing damage, green likes playing big stuff, blue likes things like flying and drawing cards, and black just likes murdering people. Well, everything really. Doesn't really care whether it's a human or an elf or a cyclops as one of the early cards. And then you can play creatures or enchantments or artifacts or instants and sorceries off the mana. All the cards that are not of those instants and sorcery are permanent cards that stay on the field after you play them, while the instant and sorcery go to your graveyard at the end of when it's used. They have their one-time effect and then they're done. Creatures cannot attack after they are played on the same turn. You have to wait a turn unless they have an ability like haste. There are a lot more abilities, and I will be explaining those always like slowly over time. But haste and flying are one of the two like most iconic ones. To indicate you are using a card, whether it is a land card for using mana or indicating a creature to attack, they are tapped. Tapping means they are turned sideways, and that cannot be used until they are untapped at the start of your turn. There are ways to untap creatures, but normally it's just during your untapped step. As soon as everything is untapped, it is untapped. You cannot um combo a little bit like tapping 3 lands for mana, then go to your untap and then tap the rest for more mana. That is not possible. And your goal is to use your creatures to bring the life total of your opponents to 0. Then I'll finally go over 4 deck archetypes. Those are basically the ideas of deck builders that are like the most basic level of ideas of what does the deck do. So the first one is aggro. Aggro likes to play cheap creatures that are strong, that generally have haste, that attack as soon as possible to like kill your opponent as fast as possible before you run out of cards to play. Because sometimes if you have 4 lands, you play 2 cards that both are 2 mana. That's what those aggro decks do. Then next up we have mid range. Mid range is between aggro and the upcoming third type, and they generally just want to play big creatures, generally 3-4 mana big creatures, and they also like to ramp a bit if possible. They are slower than aggro decks, but faster than the third type, which are control decks. Control decks play a lot of removal cards because they just want to stay in control of the battlefield, and because by the way, that's that's one thing I forgot to say. But this is actually called the battlefield. Take control of the battlefield and control of the opponent's actions until they can deploy something very big that can kill your opponent in only a few attacks. And the last one is combo, and I will not have a really real example with combo, but combo uses a special interaction between 2 or 3 cards, sometimes more, but generally it's 2 or more cards that, when put in a certain scenario, can have a very powerful effect, such as 2 cards that says, one says whenever you gain life, your opponent loses life, and the second card says whenever your opponent loses life, you gain life. So as soon as either you gain life or your opponent loses life, they will start triggering a loop, and one causes to gain you life, another one says, oh, you gained life, your opponent loses life. Then, oh, your opponent loses life, you gain life again, and you just go infinite. And you gain infinite life, and your opponent loses infinite life, and they're dead immediately, which is actually pretty basic combo example. But there are various different types of combos, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I do have a few more cards that I did want, actually one more card I want to show you guys. This here is an example of a non-basic land. It's a bit more complicated than normal lands. For example, this one can give you both blue or black mana, but you have to either pay 2 life or have it enter the battlefield tapped. So you can't, if it enters the battlefield tapped, you cannot use the mana on the turn you play it. And often, like non-basic lands give you more colors, but at a restriction of tapped or like whatever other restriction, they they are often like balanced between giving you more and like being more restrictive in some way or another. But yeah, I think that is all for today, guys. I hope I made some sense at least, but I doubt it. I probably just like doing some understandable rambling here. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and I'll catch you guys all later. See ya.